Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, whatever time it is from wherever you are signing in. It's morning in rainy Los Angeles. We've got some much needed rain this morning, so happy about that. I'm Roopa Dandamudi. I am the team relations. I manage team relations for XPRIZE carbon removal. You've probably seen me on other webinars or maybe heard from me via email. I'm joined here by my colleagues, Marcus Extravor, who's the VP of Energy and Climate on the prize and at XPRIZE, Nikki Batchelor, who's our prize director, and Michael Leach, who's our technical lead. So I want to go ahead and get us started. We've got a couple of hours set aside for the Oceans Track session of the XPRIZE Carbon Removal Team Summit. So thanks for those who joined us yesterday for our main session. We will be sending those recordings out today. It took a while to process since it was a pretty long session. So I was hoping to get it out yesterday, but we'll be sending those out today so you can share with your team members who weren't able to make it, or if you would like to review what was covered. So without delay, I'd just like to introduce our speakers. Just to break down the agenda for you. From 8 a.m. or the first half hour, we're going to be hearing from our speakers, and then we'll have 30 minutes of Q&A, followed by an hour of networking breakout sessions where you all will be kind of automatically shuffled around to different rooms for over an hour with 15-minute sessions each. So plenty of time for you to network with each other, and hopefully that is valuable for you. So to kick things off, our speakers are Chris Verlinden, who is Chief Technology Officer at Applied Ocean Sciences, Brad Ack, who is a Executive Director and Chief Innovation Officer at Ocean Visions, and Scott Doney, who is a professor in environmental change, Department of Environmental Sciences at University of Virginia. So I'm going to hand it off to our speakers to go ahead and get started.
Perfect. I guess I can jump in first there. Thank you very much. Like you said, my name is Chris Verlinden. I'm the CTO of a little company called Applied Ocean Sciences. We do oceanographic research primarily for the U.S. Navy, NOAA, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and a few other agencies. My own background is I was a Coast Guard officer for a while before going back to school to do my PhD in oceanography. And I've been very involved in topics related to carbon capture in the ocean for the last decade or so. The thing I wanted to primarily focus on is, I tried to put myself in the shoes of someone who is submitting and the things that I would want to know going in, presuming, that everybody going in has, sort of read the
recording in progress,
the instructions for the whole competition, knows the criteria, knows the judging metrics. And what I wanted to do was communicate, or sort of map some of those metrics and requirements to some of the decisions that you'll be making while finalizing your proposals. And so the first thing that I wanted to go over was just review the objectives. The goal is kilotons of carbon per year demonstrated, buried in a way that is permanent, in that it will last for larger than 100 years. That's what we're all being required to do. The ocean track means the ocean is involved with your proposed solution, be it on the burial front. You're planning on burying carbon, in a manner that involves the ocean, or using some ocean process such as plankton or some of the chemical oceanographic processes in order to aid in the burial of carbon. There are, I think, some considerations that are pretty unique to the ocean track. As you're probably aware, we've already gone through judging student competitions, and of course the judges are familiar with the existing literature that's out there in carbon capture. And so I wanted to map the objectives that we had to some of the considerations you'll be making. The first thing that jumped out at me is that every team that submits to this XPRIZE has to have the entire solution. So there's advantages and disadvantages to that, but it's possible that some of you have an idea to accomplish one aspect of the sort of the chain for carbon capture. You might have created a new way of isolating carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, a direct air capture system, an engineered plankton that is very efficient, whatever it is. And then that's your real niche, that's your contribution. But as part of this XPRIZE, everybody is expected to go, sort of cradle to grave. You need to capture the carbon, you need to bury the carbon. And so what that means is if you don't have a carbon burial solution, for example, in that case where you've been focusing on just the capturing technology, then you definitely need to find that. And I think events like this, where there's a lot of the people are submitting, are all in the same place. The XPRIZE website, if you haven't perused it in great deal, there's on your portal, there's the chance to message other folks who have accounts there. And so you can join up with other teams, you can collaborate with anybody, in the field who might have these other solutions. But the key is, if you don't have the complete solution, you do need that in your team. Just having the very best, of one small niche part of the problem is not going to be enough. And to me, that's the biggest risk of not. That's the biggest risk for us from the XPRIZE Foundation of not succeeding is failing to capture those types of ideas. And so if you are one of those folks who only who have a small part of the problem, please over the next a month or so, start working with other folks who have the rest of the solution so that you can solve the entire problem. The next thing that is going to be a big issue for any of the ocean submittals is scalability and economics. You obviously you don't need to get to gigaton in the course of this prize. You need to get to kiloton, but it needs to be possible to get to gigaton. And I think that is both an opportunity in the ocean world. The ocean is vast, and many of the processes that you might be looking at for carbon capture involving the ocean lend themselves to scaling. But your solution does need to scale to be able to get to gigaton scale. And the reason that's worth calling out is that I think a lot of us probably agree that the ultimate solution to this problem is going to come from a variety of places. And so anything that helps is good, right? Even if you have a process that reduces, for example, the carbon dioxide emissions of, a steel foundry, that is wonderful, but that's not within the scope of this XPRIZE. Your XPRIZE solution needs to be able to get to gigaton of carbon removal per year. The other thing that's going to come up in oceans that's related to that is the fact that it needs to be buried for 100 years. So there's a formula in the Carbon Prize rules. I think it's on page 4 that says how we're calculating the net amount of carbon dioxide removed. So it's the gross amount removed. And then if you have any re-emission, so for example, if you're planting a forest and the trees die and decompose, et cetera, and some percentage of that carbon will be re-emitted after within that first 100 years, that is removed from your total, and then minus the emissions of your entire process. And so if your process, for example, is incredibly energy hungry and you don't have a proposed solution for how to get that energy in a sustainable way, then that's also counted against you. So your net removed, both counts, anything that's re-emitted, but also the emissions that your solution will create. And that's going to include energy. And so we expect to get a lot of proposals for processes for capturing carbon that are incredibly energetically expensive, that rely on clean and renewable energy solutions, but aren't part of their plan. If you are relying on sources of clean and renewable energy, that needs to be part of your plan as well. And then I think the final thing that's worth calling out specifically in the ocean category is environmental impact. That's not, explicitly addressed in the rules as a metric. But, if your plan is to, create some bioengineered plankton species and release it into the ocean, and that's going to be our carbon capture scenario. If it's going to kill everything in the ocean, that's probably a problem. And so, some understanding of what the environmental impact of your project should be specifically addressed, particularly if you think it's something that's going to be of concern to the judges. So, as an oceanographer, I tend to not love the idea of releasing, engineered organisms, for example, into the open ocean, doing in controlled settings, whatever it is. But so addressing any possible environmental impacts of your project is important. That's not to say you can't have an environmental impact, right? I mean, we agree that the carbon dioxide situation is incredibly serious, and so sometimes there might be trade-offs, and certainly those need to be considered. But a direct, discussion of and addressing those potential environmental impacts is important. And finally, economics. Most folks submitting to the ocean track know it is expensive and hard to work in the ocean. And so, the solution needs to be economically tenable. It needs to be possible to not only run your project at the current scale, but to get it up to Giga 10 in a way that can support itself and is financially feasible. And I think that's all I have. Like I said, I just wanted to basically go through the metrics for carbon capture and map them to some of the specific questions that if I was preparing a proposal in the ocean track, I would have. And so again, that is just consider the scalability, consider what is meant by the net carbon removal, consider the fact that the carbon needs to be buried for 100 years, consider the economics, and consider the environmental impact of the solution that you're proposing. And that's all I have. Brad, were you next, or?
Yeah, I think I am. Thanks. That was a great overview of some of the key points and concerns that I think everybody has to address. And so I'm not going to repeat those. Let me just start by introducing myself. Brad Ack. I'm the executive director of an organization called Ocean Visions, which is a organization that sits at the intersection of academia and research in the oceanographic sciences and engineering, alongside practitioners, investors, accelerators, and others who help turn and move ideas out of laboratories and through prototypes and into field trials, and ultimately, when proven to be successful and functional, into deployment. We are really proud to be partnering with XPRIZE on the ocean-based CDR pathways here for the carbon removal prize. And the way that we're partnering is we've created a project called Launchpad, which has invited ocean-based CDR competitors to submit applications to us for potential technical assistance. And for those that we select, we'll be providing tailored technical assistance to deal with very specific engineering, science, policy, governance, business, or other challenges that a team might face. And while we've sort of closed our application for the first round, we will probably be reopening and having a second cohort over the course of time. But we're really interested in knowing everybody who's in the space, because I think one of the most important things that we need to recognize about this particular part of the carbon removal arena is that it is still very much in development. And so we need broad-based collaborations on some of the critical issues that affect everybody in the space. And so this is what I want to talk to you about today, is some of the work that we've done at Ocean Visions on creating roadmaps for the development of ocean-based pathways for carbon removal. And I'm going to share my screen really quickly to show you what these look like, because I would encourage you to actually look at these maps and just to get a better sense of what some of these cross-cutting issues are, and also to find people who may be working on things that are important to you. So we have three big technology domain maps, one on electrochemistry approaches, one on macroalgae cultivation, and one on ocean alkalinity enhancement. We do not have a microalgae map here. We're developing that this coming year, and we also are developing one on blue carbon. So if your pathways are in those two areas, we don't have a map that's directly relevant, but there is a lot of information on our other website called oceancdr.net. Any one of these maps has three components to it when you click on it. An overview of the state of technology, and there's multiple technology pathways in each of these broad domains, highlighting of what some of the development gaps and needs are, and first order priorities. And what's important for me to communicate here is that these first order priorities are things that no individual entrepreneur is likely to solve themselves. First of all, if you did, everybody else would be a free rider for the most part, right? So many of these things, like new modeling tools that support design and evaluation, or how do you measure the scale and impacts of CDR via macroalgae sinking? These are the things that are better solved through collaboration, and they lift all boats, so to speak, pardon the pun, if we solve them. Because, for example, in the macroalgae arena, everybody needs to solve this problem. So any particular team that works on it all by themselves is probably disadvantaging themselves to some extent. So I guess this is all my way of saying that while you're working on your tech and your business model, think about places that you might contribute and be part of what we call pre-competitive collaborations around some of these critical things like monitoring and verification protocols. We're all going to need those in order to have successful ocean-based pathways. And what I really want to highlight is this one: growing and maintaining public support. Chris touched on this, but only briefly. The environmental issues in the oceans are red hot rails. I've been working in the ocean conservation space most of my career, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with, members of the ocean environmental community and the broader environmental community. But ocean pathways have a higher hurdle to clear than most of the land-based pathways. And that is because of a whole lot of what we call barriers to increasing public acceptance. So first of all, I'm just going to go through a couple of these. There is this idea about relative environmental risks. People think that taking any risk with the ocean is a risk that we can't, that's too dangerous. And this really ignores the fact that not doing this work, not reversing this crisis, is the biggest threat to the oceans that there is. And so we have to measure the action of a CDR pathway against the inaction of not cleaning up carbon. There's a real low awareness of the ocean's potential for carbon removal. There's this precautionary principle, which I just touched on, this no action fallacy. Maybe one of the biggest ones is this moral hazard argument. And this is for the entire XPRIZE. Anything that works on CDR is taking energy away from carbon decarbonization. So I just highlight these because I think all of you who are in this space need to be really keenly aware of the social and political issues. I would just give a couple of thoughts and advice on this. First of all, be transparent as possible in what you're trying to do, and get people with differing points of views to serve potentially as advisors or advisory teams. Engage local communities where you might be working, and certainly also engage the environmental community, but engage other scientists and practitioners as well. Be really cognizant of the regulatory challenges that will face you depending on where you're going to try to do your prototypes and your field trials. It really varies quite a lot depending on what jurisdiction that you're working in. And certainly every country has different laws and regulatory frameworks. It's super important to be aware of those now and to be planning for those, because they can really inhibit your ability to prove out many of the milestones that XPRIZE has to be successful. And then lastly, I would say, be really cautious about commercializing too quickly. if you start selling carbon credits before environmental issues have been sorted out and before you have any sort of evidence that your path is safe, and you start to both sell credits and try to assure everybody that it is safe, you're going to put yourself into a painful situation. And we've seen it with a lot of others. If you need to take early investment, which everybody does, I would recommend taking it as sort of seed capital in exchange for future carbon credits if the technology is proven, or something along those lines, right? Like a forward, the right of first refusal if you're successful. But advanced selling of carbon credits before answering many of these complicated questions, I think, is a very high risk for any entrepreneur in this space. So with that, I will stop and turn it over to Scott Doney and commend the National Academy study that I know he'll talk about as a great source also of information for anybody in the ocean pathway space. And happy to answer any questions offline or talk to any of you offline as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brad. So I'm Scott Doney. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia. I'm not directly affiliated with the XPRIZE. I think I was asked to talk because I recently chaired, as Brad mentioned, a National Academy report on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal and sequestration. So I'll put a link to this in the chat in a moment. So the report, I think, would be a very a very useful resource for folks on this call. The goal of the report was to identify many of the things that Brad talked about that Ocean Visions is also doing, identifying knowledge gaps, looking at research paths forward, looking at governance, legal, social dimensions of the problem, looking at the natural sciences and engineering challenges, including environmental monitoring and verification, which I think is, in addition to the environmental issues, it's often very difficult to demonstrate verifiably that carbon is removed in the ocean and stored durably for a length of time. So the report actually looks at 6 different broad topics. So there's, within the report, there's a detailed chapter on cross-cutting issues, things like monitoring and verification that I just mentioned, governance, social dimensions of this impact, and some of the environmental impacts as well, including intended consequences. For example, the iron fertilization approach, which has been discussed for many years, would involve a radical change in marine ecosystem dynamics on a large scale. That's an intended consequence that has ramifications that need to be explored, as well as what are the possible unintended or unknown consequences that might occur as you scale up. We provide detailed assessments. This is a peer-reviewed document to the degree that we could, with a lot of references, tables, things like that, looking at 6 broad areas. One was ocean nutrient fertilization, including macronutrients and iron. The second is artificial upwelling to bring nutrients up to the surface to stimulate blooms. We look at seaweed or macroalgal aquaculture as a disposal mechanism, as well as ecosystem recovery as a possible conservation-based carbon removal approach. In addition, we look at alkalinity enhancement and electrochemical approaches, where the electrochemical approaches span from both alkalinity-based approaches and also CO2 stripping. Most of the discussion within the report is on, except for the CO2 stripping, is based on approaches which are either changing seawater chemistry and thus enhancing its ability to take up carbon, or biological approaches which would push carbon into the deep sea, removing it from the surface ocean. This is only a little bit on things that would remove carbon from the ocean and store it somewhere else. There is another complementary Academy report from 2019 that looked at land-based approaches, and that might be also useful to many of the folks. That spans from things like biochar in soils to direct air capture, reforestation, but also coastal blue carbon approaches associated with wetlands, seagrasses, marshes, mangroves, things along that line. One of the things that's recommended in the report is a map or an outline for a potential research code of conduct. So this involves stakeholder engagement and some of the legal and governance requirements, and also providing a framework in which to do ocean field research. And I strongly recommend that everybody take a look at that. As Brad mentions, there are lots of social issues with this. It's a complicated regulatory framework that's not fully resolved by any means, either in the US or internationally. And even small scale experiments in the ocean can be viewed quite negatively in the social dimension space and by environmental groups. So I would be very careful about that move from the laboratory to the field without a deep look at what stakeholder groups would be involved and what stakeholder groups' perceptions of the activity might be. The same day this report came out last week, there was also a report from the Aspen Institute that came out the same day, which has some of the same participants from the National Academy report. So this was focused more on this research code of conduct. The Aspen Institute didn't provide a full detailed code of conduct, but it does cover many of the issues. There's some overlap and complementarity between the Aspen Institute document and the full National Academy report. So I think there's a lot of resources out there for you guys to take a look at. So I'll put those in the chat, and I'm here to answer questions. But as I pointed out at the beginning, I'm not affiliated or associated with the XPRIZE. So more detailed questions about that process, the XPRIZE process, should be directed towards Chris or Brad or staff from the XPRIZE. So I'll turn it back over.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. We are about ready for our Q&A. We have a half an hour or so to get into some questions. And since there are quite a few of you, there is a option to raise your hand on the bottom of the screen. I think under reactions, you can raise your hand if you have a question. And then when I call on you, you can go ahead and ask a question. So I think we should just go ahead and do that first. That'll be how we'll do this. So let's see who's raising their hand. Okay. Okay, we have Joffrey Camacho has a question.
Joffrey, you want to ask your question?
Hi, yes. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, thanks for having us. Thanks for having this conversation. And well, my question, going to the point, I see Ocean Visions and all the other entrepreneurs who have been talking today about macroalgae and sinking microalgae deep into the ocean. But I found little information about microalgae and microalgae projects inside the scope of the XPRIZE competition. So I just wanna know if this is something on purpose, or is microalgae not as relevant as all other pathways on your roadmaps? Thank you. That was my question.
I can take a stab at that one, and then Brad, if you want to supplement it. Microalgae is absolutely within scope. Just happens to be that we were talking more today about previous work done with macroalgae and seaweeds, but we expect to be getting a lot of proposals that involve microalgae, and those are absolutely going to be something we consider. I'd be shocked if those weren't part of it.
Not much to add to that other than to say that the National Academy study out microalgae very clearly as one of the pathways, and we saw in our launchpad applications a number of microalgae based approaches. So I think they're squarely there.
Yeah, and I would just, this is Scott, two of the broad approaches, the artificial upwelling to bring up nutrients, which also has effects on temperature of the surface ocean. That is focused on, I wouldn't call them microalgae, I would just call them phytoplankton, but that's my terminology issue. And also the nutrient fertilization, where you bring in external sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, or iron. Those are both focused on microalgae. So I would recommend taking a look at those two chapters in the National Academy report.
Okay. Okay, thanks. We have a question from Jake Beard. Up next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my question is, my project is going to be actually traveling over the oceans, and the impact that I'm worried about is if, say, one of the project items, I guess I should say, falls into the ocean. Is there connection to that? And I also plan on having platforms for launching from the ocean, but it's not actually connected to the water itself. And as far as the team session later on, is there a form of protection we can have? I've been noticing a lot of team people who have been trying to get involved, and then they don't. And then I actually have one who has joined another team, and I'm positive that they've taken some of the information that we spoke about. When we sign up a team member, are they already under a non-disclosure agreement? And do you guys have a template for that, for those that we could use as team members for protection? And that's my question.
Roopa, maybe you could take the organizational aspect of the question, the second part, and then I'll take a stab at the first part.
Sure. Enable.
I think I can try that one. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Marcus.
Yeah, so I think unfortunately the basic answer is no. It's up to you to control information flow among your team members or between teams. Every team has, now there's a bit of a caveat there. We could certainly work on, let's say, providing a template NDA. Every team has entered into an NDA with XPRIZE, so that anything you submit to us, we are keeping confidential and only sharing with the judges, for instance, or anyone under NDA. But there's nothing formally that XPRIZE will do to prevent a team member from moving from one team to another and, let's say, sharing information. We're leaving that up to you. That said, every team has to acknowledge, you've already done this by signing the competitor agreement, that you have access to your own IP. And we ask you to do that so that if a dispute arises between two teams, we can quickly, figure out like, well, look, if you're infringing on someone else's IP without rights, then that's a way to be disqualified from the competition. So we have a look at it that way, but we're not formally, let's say, tracking team members that may be moving between teams or dropping and being added. So hopefully that's helpful. If a template NDA would be helpful, please write to us, and that's something we can maybe look into providing just as a basic starting point to help everybody along.
And to the first part of that question, I think you were saying, your solution's not necessarily an ocean solution, but some of the impacts could be related to the ocean. The divides between the tracks are honestly soft. There's going to be quite a few times where, the rock people need to call on the ocean people to get a full judging of the competition. I mean, there's the world, it's so interconnected that you can't just isolate things. So we expect that to happen a lot, where there's going to be proposals that involve expertise across multiple tracks and disciplines, and we'll address those as those come up. So that's not a problem. If your proposal is not in the ocean track but requires ocean expertise to evaluate thoroughly, we'll make sure that those judges are the ones assigned to your proposal.
Awesome.
That was from, I guess, when I last did it yesterday. So we lost that much.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. So the next question we have is from Marnie Oten. Marnie, go ahead and unmute and you can ask your question.
Hi, everyone, and good morning from Melbourne, Australia. It is 3:30 in the morning, so I'm trying to stay awake.
Thank you for staying awake.
I did appreciate all that information that was shared earlier. Really, really helpful. I think myself and many others are on a mission not to repeat work that's been done by others before and take it further from where it's been done before. So my question, I think it's been implied in the discussions around carbon methodologies. In the ocean space, it makes sense. We're talking about systems. But in terms of the competition, is that something which is going to be complex in the documentation when you've got, sort of 3 or 4 different assets coming to it? Is that something that has been assumed is just part of some of the applications? Because I've heard lots of people talk about just one sequestration technology, not merging together many.
Marnie, I think unfortunately, at least from on my side, you broke up a little bit there. I think a critical part of the question. Could you just restate the question very quickly again, just to make sure we're answering it properly?
Yeah, so it's combining different carbon removal technologies into one solution as being a core part of the delivery here. So how, is that something that's being accepted as part of the competition?
It is, and Marcus, correct me if I speak out of turn here, but so I think there's a fundamental acknowledgement in the competition that, to get to that 10 gigaton per year scale that the IPCC report says we need to get to by 2050, there's going to be multiple solutions, which is why we're very glad that we're definitely going to get a diversity of solutions. Your particular idea does need to be able to get to gigaton, but your particular idea might involve multiple technologies or capabilities combined together, but still your proposal needs to include everything that it would need to get to ultimately, map to gigaton scale removal and to, during the demonstration period, get to kiloton. So if that involves combining multiple technologies, some of which might be your new novel tech and some might be, utilization of existing technology, then that's okay, as long as your proposal gets you the full scale required by the competition.
No, that's really good. And that's linked to my next question, which is application of third-party verifications. Is natural capital accounting considered an acceptable methodology?
I don't know the answer to that. Marcus or Brad, do you guys have that off the top of your head?
Actually, Mike, do you want to jump in here? Are you?
Yeah, I can try to speak to that. I'm not familiar with that. If that is that a group or a standard?
Yeah, it's linked to the United Nations. It's a standard accepted by the UN.
Okay, so it's really up to each team to sort of define that. The most important thing is that the verifier who's doing the work is deemed qualified and independent. And then the standards that they choose would be based on their expertise. So I have to kind of leave that to you.
That's good. And obviously some lean itself to those multiple layers when you're stacking different methodologies, right? So that's the reason, the connection. Thank you so much for those answers.
Okay. Next question we have is from Maxime.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So I'm from Montreal, Canada. And I have a question here. It's about the proof of concept and the demonstration performance worksheet. I was wondering if we do have to perform a full lab test in laboratory so we can prove the concept, or if we can have data that is from the literature in scientific papers. Because right now what we do have a concept, we do have engineering documentations, and we do have values, but all these values are from the literature. We don't have a real prototype working right now. So is this sufficient to apply to the milestone if we just have data that is from the literature?
So the intent of this round of the competition was to have teams build something, and demonstrate that they've actually commissioned some equipment. So what you've described doesn't meet the standard, but having said that, that's not stopping you from applying and kind of seeing what happens. But the judges will be sort of instructed to favor the teams who have working demonstrations.
Yeah, I mean, if there is an aspect of the literature that you could reproduce with an experiment, that would be, kind of within the scope of what you're capable of, that would definitely help in that decision. So even if it's, just verifying some, pre-existing literature values or a reaction that's critical for your final prototype to work, that would make it more compelling.
All right, because we are using electrolysis process, so there's plenty of informations already on this kind of technology. So what we could do is like let's say small test bench just to test some to get the specific values. It wouldn't be kind of a small scale prototype, but just like a small test bench so we can get our values. That could be enough.
Yeah, we've said that the demonstration can be any scale and it can be any scope. So really we're just looking for teams to do some demonstration themselves. It's supposed to be a demonstration of technical competency as well as project competency, and so and no disrespect to all the good work you've been doing on the engineering side, but the XPRIZE, at this point in the competition, we really want to see something real that's been built, like I said, at any scale, at any size, that shows that you're sort of on the way to collecting real world data.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Laura Steighorst. She is having trouble using the raise hand function, so I'm just going to invite her to unmute and ask her question. And if anyone else is having a similar issue, please direct message or chat to let us know.
Hi, thank you, Roopa. So my question is for all of you at XPRIZE. As Brad mentioned, the implementation of ocean-based solutions is restricted by, approvals and permitting, much more so than land-based solutions. So how will this be considered by the judges, given that modeling our scale and implementing at scale is going to be highly dependent on getting these approvals?
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts there. So ultimately, if our goal is 10 gigatons per year carbon capture by 2050, it's possible that, laws can change and regulations can be adjusted in the next 3 years during your demonstration period. I would say it's highly unlikely just based at the pace of, government. And so your demonstration will need to be legal under the current paradigm. If there is not a way to get the permitting or to legally demonstrate your kiloton scale project, then even if it's a wonderful idea and it should absolutely be pushed forward, we won't be able to do the verification within the scope of the XPRIZE. So I would say, at least for me as a judge, I would be okay if ultimately the gigaton scale implementation of your idea would require, changes in regulations, but the kiloton scale that you do over the next couple of years for this competition needs to be legal in the current paradigm.
Thank you very much.
To add one thing, there are many coastal countries in the world, and they all have different regulatory frameworks, and they have very different motivations and incentives around carbon removal. Some are much more embracing of it than others. So, you can also think carefully about where you might want to do the kiloton demonstration.
I just want to jump in with a point on that. It's a great question, Laura. The first person to figure out a jurisdiction that could be open to safe and legal testing, they should share that info, because perhaps more than one group can benefit, and we might get a small regional cluster of people that are able to safely test in certain conditions. So just something to think about. We'll be keeping our eye out for that kind of thing at XPRIZE too, but that's a thought for everybody here. One way we can work together.
Yeah, maybe just one more thing. We're really trying to build some alliances with small island developing states and other states in the global south with large EEZs, because, frankly, these are the countries that are at the coalface of change and danger. And there's just more, I think, more willingness to consider possible solutions, as well as hopefully being part of what will become a very large economic enterprise on this planet. It's our only path, one of our only paths to safety is to make that so. And there's no reason why that should be dominated by the North.
Okay. Our next question is from John Chandler.
I have two questions,
Right.
if that's okay.
Sure.
First off, and I've asked this a couple times, but I'd really like to hear the people on this call answer it, which is, we're talking about seawater and carbon dioxide. Can freshwater rivers and lakes also be used for carbon dioxide capture? Or is that just outside of the realm, or would there have to be a lot of documentation we provide to show that that really is the kind of carbon we want to capture?
I can jump in on that one. We said get the CO2 from the air or the oceans, because that's where it is and we want to take it out. Now, if you're suggesting remove CO2 from fresh water or open water, I think that's in scope, but others that may know better correct me. I think it may not be that relevant. I don't think that's a major problematic source of CO2. However, if your question is, can I use fresh water bodies for CO2 storage or some kind of other activation on the way to sequestration, I think the answer is yes. In other words, I know the conversation around oceans has also spoken about burying carbon in the ocean somehow.
And I'm specifically referring, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I am specifically talking about pulling dissolved aqueous CO2 out of freshwater lakes to then sequester, or freshwater rivers.
Okay.
Marcus, I think the long pole in the tent there would be demonstrating that there is enough CO2 captured in those systems and that your solution would be scalable. While the prize does particularly call out CO2 in the ocean and air because that's where it is, I am more than willing to be proven wrong in saying that there is enough CO2 in these lakes, or maybe if you continuously pull the CO2 out of it, they'll continuously absorb more. I would be very open to a proposal that uses freshwater lakes to pull carbon dioxide out of, the environment at large. It would just be, for me, my bias going in is that there's just less fresh water than there is salt water, and that, it would be tough to demonstrate potential gigaton capture using that system, but I'm very happy to be shown to be incorrect in that.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that point, building off of what Marcus said and what Chris said, the reason the ocean is included in scope is because there's a demonstrated flux of CO2, ongoing flux of CO2 between the ocean and the air. So we're basically considering that to be the same zone, even though there's two phases of matter there. We would want to make sure that you're able to demonstrate that the water, that the CO2 that you're pulling out of the fresh water did also come from the air, that flux is present, as opposed to that CO2 being, for example, absorbed from geologic formations or something like that. Does that make sense? So like if you're pulling CO2 out of a hot spring, for example, that's actually an emitter. That was not what we had in mind.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put in the chat. I mean, there has been some nice synthesis work on the anthropogenic perturbation to the freshwater to ocean aquatic continuum and how much of the carbon in those systems is and the fluxes that are due to natural processes versus anthropogenic. So that might be a source that you could use to think about that.
Okay, thank you very much. My second question is, and this one is much more about the life cycle costing of this, and part of it is very ocean specific, but part of it isn't. We use ships. Do we have to, or if you are using ships on the ocean, do you have to include the cost of the carbon cost of building the ship? And if you are capturing the carbon and then making it into a usable product and able to sell that product, provided you can prove that it's not destroyed later on, do you have to include the supply chain after you have sold it in your cradle to grave inclusion?
Yes, to the second half. The downstream emissions associated with any product or any sequestered CO2 do need to be considered through to end of life. The question about the carbon footprint of the ships is an interesting one. I hadn't really thought about that. I think it's if you can quantify it, I think it would be best to quantify it, maybe with an asterisk there. I don't know if anyone else from my team has any thoughts on that.
We had been considering the carbon footprint of operating the vessels, but I also had not thought about, just as you're doing a comparison of using this vehicle versus that vehicle, the carbon footprint, of the life of the vehicle sort of divided by the portion of it that you're using for your project. I think, yeah, I mean, now that you mention it, that probably should be part of it.
I am sorry I've mentioned this. I withdraw my question.
If you hadn't said anything, we probably wouldn't have docked anyone for not mentioning the carbon footprint of building a ship.
I am so sorry.
We have a question from Marnie Oten next.
Oh, sorry, I'll take it down.
Oh, okay, yes. If you've already asked your questions, you can lower your hand, just so, because we're just going to call it as we see it in the list. So next question we have is from Paul Wickett.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. There was a lot of talk in the rules and the guidelines, about the durability of the sequestration. We're looking at photoplankton and getting it to the bottom of the ocean. Since photoplankton shells are essentially carbon carbonate and silicon carbonate, can we consider that to be a stable form of carbon and therefore not have to monitor the storage of those biomass?
Can I take a crack at that?
Sure.
One of the concerns is that although, so most organism shells are made out of some form of calcium carbonate, and you might think that that's a form of carbon sequestration, but actually when organisms form calcium carbonate in the surface ocean, they shift both the amount of inorganic carbon, but also the alkalinity. And so typically when you form a shell, you actually increase the amount of aqueous CO2 in the surface ocean. It's actually a source to the atmosphere when you form calcium carbonate, either through plankton shells or corals. So I'd be very careful about the chemistry there. The other thing is that the deep ocean, if it's calcium carbonate, many parts of the deep ocean are corrosive to calcium carbonate. So those shells are not necessarily going to be buried depending upon where they go.
But if I can assure that or show that I can get those shells to the seabed, is that considered?
Even if they, well, first off, you have the problem of the chemistry in the surface ocean. If you just form calcium carbonate, you're actually going the wrong way.
But don't diatoms already account for 20 to 40% of the CO2?
Diatoms, the diatom shell is made out of silicate. It's not made out of carbon. The shell material is not carbon. There's organic carbon.
Carbonate does have carbon in it.
It doesn't have carbonate in it. The shell is made of silica, not of carbon for diatoms. There is organic carbon, but that organic carbon is quite labile. It will decay away quite quickly.
If I can just speak from the XPRIZE perspective, so the responsibility is for each team to sort of lay out their case and make sure that there's a scientific basis for their claims. So I think there's a great discussion. I mean, if the two of you wanted to connect offline and talk about it in more detail, we'd welcome that.
Yeah, but this is, I think, an important topic. If what I understand from Scott, he's just outruled any use of phytoplankton as a means of carbon sequestration.
As one of the judges, I can describe how I'm going to consider something like that. I mean, first of all, the papers that I read about the subject are, written by Scott and others, as well as the international reports that they write. And so I think the big point there is that carbon burial via plankton is a nuanced topic where growing a gram or removing a gram of carbon and putting a gram of carbon into plankton does not necessarily equate to carbon buried. You have to demonstrate that it is in fact buried, in the context of the literature that exists. So if you can do that, then good. But just saying, oh, I grew a gram of plankton in the surface ocean, I'm assuming it's going to sink and all is going to be
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
so I think, yeah.
But what I understood from Scott, he just said is just because I've grown plankton, that is not capturing the carbon.
Yeah, and I
hear that wrong.
No, I would rephrase that slightly to say that you have not necessarily captured the carbon. You can't stop at just growing the plankton. You need to demonstrate to us, in the context of the larger body of literature, that carbon will in fact remain buried for 100 years, and we are absolutely open to a solution that involves plankton that demonstrates that. But some of the proposals we expect to see will just say we grew a ton of plankton, and that's not going to be enough. It needs to say we grew a ton of plankton. Yeah. Exactly.
There's a two-part process. Yes. But that was my original question. If I grew this plankton and I show that I got it to the seabed, let's say at 3,000 meters, is that considered a stable storage of carbon?
I would say it could be, depending on the chemistry and the form of carbon. And the papers I'll be reading are Scott's and his colleagues on that. So
I would suggest taking a look at the National Academy report. There's a pretty detailed discussion on return paths for carbon, depending upon where it's deposited in the ocean.
Okay. Into it.
Can you?
I've put it in the chat. You probably just have to scan up.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're all going to the same place.
Okay, thank you. We have a question next from Levi Bailey. Levi, when you are ready, go ahead and ask your question. Thanks.
Thanks, Roopa. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the XPRIZE team and all their collaborators for the efforts into this. Just a detailed question on the rules and specifically the evaluation criteria for phase one. Am I right to understand that sort of hypothetically, if hundreds of teams manage to meet all the sort of binary criteria, like they demonstrate an aspect of their process and they have it verified, and they demonstrate a credible plan for getting it up to gigaton scale and that sort of thing, the 25 winners will be the ones with the lowest price for the fully considered cost per ton as they can sort of build a case for at megaton scale. Is that what it comes down to if there's multiple teams that meet all the other criteria?
Lowest cost is one factor and demonstrated scale is another factor.
Sorry, demonstrated scale?
Yeah, the size and scale of the demonstration.
Okay, so it's a multi-factor evaluation, and how those two factors are weighted is not actually articulated anywhere. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. The judges are given fairly broad discretion within the parameters of what's written in the guidelines.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you very much.
Okay, next question is from Philip Slaughter. Philip,
good afternoon from London.
Good afternoon.
Question is around the quality of the sequestration. So in this track, we're talking about 100 years as a marker for locking that carbon up. But that measures against perhaps decade for trees, millennia for biochar and other solutions, and forever with, say, direct air capture and mineralization. So I was curious if you could comment about how I would describe it as the quality of sequestration is measured from the various technology, or compared across each of the technology suites or the tracks.
So there isn't a huge as far as the judging of the competition goes, there is not a solid line between the tracks. So we aren't really looking at track A versus track B, or you know what I mean. Our attempt with the design of this competition is to really kind of try to take a step back, and from a high view just ask the question, number one, does the carbon stay sequestered for at least 100 years? And then number two, are there any adverse impacts associated with sequestering that CO2? So at this round in the competition, we're looking for teams to demonstrate both sort of the binary, yes, does it stay 100, or no, doesn't it stay 100? And if not, that's okay. It's about estimating what that re-emission factor will be, and accounting for that in your design. So you have a couple of opportunities to demonstrate durability, and one is by making a stable form of carbon, like a carbonate, or something that can be shown to be stable for a long period of time, or you can manage that carbon to minimize the risk of re-emission. On the environmental impact side, you'll see this is in section 9 of the submission guidelines, and we're just asking teams to discuss this at this point. For the final round of the competition, we are going to expect a much more robust life cycle analysis that considers a full suite of environmental impacts beyond just the carbon impacts. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Because one of the concerns I had was the perhaps disparity that might exist if some folk can claim forever quality level sequestration, but maybe coming in at $1,000 per ton of CO2 equivalent, where someone else can maybe claim scalability, but it's really low quality in terms of its durability in the environment. I'm just curious how you would manage that, but you're very clear in your answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question we have is from Perry Goldberg.
Hi, folks. Nice to see everybody, and thank you.
I never got a chance to scan anything. I just got an email to copy.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, and if you are not speaking, please put yourself on mute. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm the founder of a nonprofit that's focused on collaborative problem solving. And one of my operating assumptions here is that if someone had perfect information and could see all of the submissions, they would be able to put some pieces of the puzzle together in a way that no individual peer is going to be able to do. And, for a competition, it's wonderful to say, I have, really cool pieces of the puzzle and I'm going to keep them to myself because I want to win the prize. But for the world, we need to put the pieces of the puzzle together and not, hoard them. So I think the XPRIZE is in this unique position. You guys have done an unbelievable job gathering such brilliant people here who I know are going to have brilliant ideas. And it seems like such a wasted opportunity if the ideas are not somehow pulled together. And I wonder whether, the XPRIZE team could say, we're going to gather, confidentially, we're going to gather what we think are the greatest hits. What are some of the greatest ideas that have emerged, even if they didn't, win because someone didn't have a verifier or someone didn't have the whole solution. But, maybe I have the perfect place to do this and someone else has the perfect business model and someone else has the perfect technology for algae, et cetera. So I would love to see the XPRIZE come up with a consolation prize, or maybe it's one of the 15 milestone prizes is you guys say, hey, we are handpicking these 10 teams to work together because you each have a unique piece of the puzzle. So I just wanted to plant that food for thought.
Hey, Perry, thanks for the comments. I mean, I love that idea. I think it's, certainly this is the kind of thing that we like to try and inspire at XPRIZE. And so that's definitely some great food for thought. So thanks for bringing that up.
I think from a judging perspective at the forefront, that was a huge part of our discussions, so far is what if this person has the very best, this part of the solution, and what do we do with that? The easiest answer is your best odds are if you find other people who have the rest of the solution. And the XPRIZE website is really nicely set up where you can message the other teams and you can talk to the other teams to try to build sort of your super team and combine forces with other folks. Open to other ways to do that. But if you know that you only have the best single niche part of it, look at the other folks who are on this call, look at the other folks on the XPRIZE website and see if you can join forces with them. Because that's what makes it easiest. But I agree that's a big concern we have.
Yeah. Can I make one follow-up point? Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think that we're all selfish and social creatures, right? We have both parts of human nature. So, and people behave according to the incentives. And in order for there to be collaboration, I think the incentives have to be right. There also has to be trust. NDAs are part of the solution here. But there's also a massive amount to do between now and February 1st. And having people kind of jump through all the hoops to get these collaborations in place is really challenging, really, really challenging. If we had one form NDA that everyone just agreed to between the teams, not just between you and XPRIZE, but it applied to you and all your communications with the other teams. For example, if you tell me an idea and I can't prove that I already had it before you told me, I won't use it, right? And like a non-circumvent, something like that. And if there were a mechanism for telling XPRIZE, hey, I shared this idea with these 4 teams. And so if you see this idea, please, take into account that it came from me. Something like that, that's not necessarily the perfect answer, but if there were some mechanism where you don't have to reach out to 20 teams and everyone has a different form of NDA and you don't know that it's actually going to be policed, even if you had the NDA in place, there are some trust mechanisms you guys could put in place at XPRIZE that would facilitate collaboration and I think help the world, have these ideas merge and emerge.
Yeah, I mean, I love the concept, Perry. It's definitely some food for thought. I just want to make a note for everyone in this room on IP because this is it's a sensitive topic and it's more sensitive for some than others. We go to great lengths to try and protect and preserve each individual's IP. We will not share any team's information with any other team without their express permission. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody on this call. But I think we are always looking for opportunities to get teams together and use the prize as an opportunity to be a nexus for innovation and collaboration. In addition to, and in fact, you know, that's in a lot of ways more fun than competition, right? So that's some food for thought. I think this is something that we're looking for ideas to try and build out after the milestone is done, and you know, during phase 2 of the competition, as people are really starting to bring their ideas to life. That'll be a great opportunity for folks who maybe participated in the milestone and maybe didn't, to you know, collaborate and join forces and so on and so forth. So great idea, Perry. I think that's some good food for thought for us on the staff side.
Okay, we have a question from Debbie Lee Wilkinson up next.
Hello, yes, with the Kepler carbon recapture team. And we're looking heavily at cement as one of the perhaps many byproducts that we can make out of the carbon dioxide that we extract. What are the considerations that the judges want to give us a little more details in some of the considerations for lifespan and usability of a product like that, and maybe even on the heels of somebody else's question, throw the seashells into the cement like aggregate.
I'll just say that the thing that you have to really be careful about, and cement is a good example, is the carbon footprint of the other reagents or the other feedstocks in the process. And so, like Portland cement in particular has a very, very large CO2 footprint that might compromise your overall carbon balance. But I mean, if you can get around that, then, you know, that good on you. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. I don't know if anybody else has anything to pitch on that.
Like if you make a seawall out of it, obviously we have to consider how the ocean's going to react to that and make a brand of cement versus Portland cement that is stable in seawater.
Yeah, I mean, all the power to you. It's just a word of caution on the life cycle side, and you know, and taking into consideration the CO2 footprints of all of the feedstocks in the system is critical.
Okay, thank you. Next question we have is from Francois. Francois, are you able to?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my question is, which track must I choose? I want to build a aquaponic farm on the ocean, but if we grow bamboo and papyrus, it is direct carbon capture from the air, if I'm right. So should I remain in the ocean track or air capture track or whatever? Sorry, I'm not an English speaker.
No, that's fine. I understand the question. That, you know, I'll give you a two-part answer. Okay, so the first answer is a little bit more general, which is you want to identify with the track. The way we use the tracks on the XPRIZE side is to assign judges to review them. And so you want to choose the track associated with the expertise of the judges that you want to evaluate your system. Okay, so that's kind of the general answer. And then the second part of the answer is if you choose one track or another and we feel that a different expertise needs to look at it, we'll reroute your application. So it's not a critical choice.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question we have is from Tyler Hodges.
Thank you. That actually just answered my question. I was curious about if you had a dual technology that could be both direct air as well as ocean capture. So thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, question from Benjamin Slotnick.
Yeah, thanks for the call and thanks for having us. The very useful Q&A session. The main question I have is from a verification perspective. I don't think there's been clarification on whether it's really carbon removal versus carbon sequestration or a combination of the two. And so if there could be some discussion about, is it at least capture and or both, that would be helpful.
Yes, we want to see removal from end to end. So the system, at least the system that you have planned for the grand prize, needs to encompass both capture and sequestration and everything in between. For the milestone phase, the upcoming submission in February, we don't have. You can demonstrate any particular aspect of that, although we would need you to articulate your plan for building out the whole system over the next couple of years.
So we could focus on a key step of the process and emphasize it as long as this part works, which we define as probably the critical connection or something along those lines, that would be sufficient for February 1.
Yeah, so the project proposal that we're asking for needs to encompass the whole carbon removal process. That's sort of part one in the submission. Part two in the submission is the demonstration, and the demonstration can be more focused on one particular piece or another.
Gotcha. Okay. No, thanks.
Okay. Let's see if we have any more. I think we have time for one or two more questions, and then we will, go into the breakout rooms with the rest of our time.
I'm sorry, I was trying to raise hand, but I had it up before, so it's showing again.
Sure.
But on back to that, just the previous comment about the proposal encompassing all the steps. For the verifications, that would need to be all the steps, not just your demo, correct? So you could demo a component, but you want the verification steps for the entire process.
Oh, yeah, good point. So the verification is focused on the demonstration. So whatever you demonstrate needs to be verified. Now the verification should include a review of the overall process. So my point is if I were a verifier, I would want to understand how the technology is to be deployed and integrated, but the priority is on the performance of whatever is demonstrated.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Hakeem, Watson Limited.
Yeah, hi guys. So a quick question. I haven't been able to wasn't able to join yesterday, and I haven't seen the video yet. It was probably answered then, but for the grand prize, the demonstration, do you actually have to run the project for a year to get your 1,000 kilotons out of it, or can it be done pro rata, that you run it for a certain time period? Then if you calculate it for 8,000 hours per year, that you get that amount out of it?
No, for the grand prize, we want to see operations for a year.
Okay.
That's the goal. That's the target. We're going to see what happens over the next little while. It's a competition, right? So it's kind of like may the best project win in a sense. Yeah.
Okay. Now I saw Elon Musk's interview a few months ago when he was asked the question. He was actually more pointing towards, no, we don't want to see all those kilotons. It was more hinting that you don't have to run it for a year. But basically, what I need to plan for is the last 12 months of my project. My machine, it needs to be running, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so in February 2024, we'll be collecting another submission, and based on the primary thing we'll be looking for at that time is, are you up and running, or are you, do you have evidence of having a commissioned system? And based on that, we'll be assigning site visits and doing due diligence on a selection of teams within that. So being up and running by February 2024 is really the target here. And then we would want to see you run for that following 12 months, at which point we'll come and do our due diligence during that year, and then you know, make the final award based on those performances.
Very clear. Thank you.
Okay, I think that concludes our Q&A portion. What I'm going to do is put everyone in breakout sessions, since we've got about 100 of us. Some of the XPRIZE folks will probably stay in the main room, but we're going to be putting you in groups of 9 in 10 rooms or so, and we'll be switching every 15 minutes, just to give you an opportunity to kind of work, get to know different people within the track. Just a few prompts ahead of time, and I'll put them into the room once you're there in case you forget what I'm saying right now, but just introduce yourself, take a minute to give your elevator pitch to the others in the room. And if you feel comfortable sharing your contact information, go ahead and do that within the chat that is going to be in your room as well. So everyone that's in that room can actually see what you're typing. So I'm going to just get those rooms set up right now. Okay. And okay, so how this will work is after each session, you'll come back to the main session, and then I'll kind of deploy you all back into the rooms again as we switch. That concludes our breakout rooms. I wish we had time for more, but we're at time for our meeting today, our session. And thanks everyone for joining. Apologies for those who weren't able to. We had a bit of a Zoom snafu with the cap on the rooms. So we will be sharing a recording of today's session. I will get the list of full registrants and send that to everyone so you can share it with your team members. And then we'll also be sending out the recording from the team summit yesterday as well. And we have a few more track sessions this week, which you're all welcome to attend as well. So other than that, that concludes our session today. Anyone from the XPRIZE team have anything else to add? Okay.
Would you be able to put those links to the other meet sessions? And can we put the non-disclosure agreement in the POP platform?
Sure. Yeah, we will be actually linking the recordings. We'll be putting the recordings in POP under resources, so you'll be able to access them there. Are you asking for the registration links for the following sessions this week?
Yes, something like that would be very nice.
Yeah, everyone will be getting those in an email today. So if you attended this meeting, you'll be getting those as well.
Roopa, I have a question.
Yes.
Will you give us perhaps the emails of the XPRIZE people who spoke today in case we have follow-up questions?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm open to it. I'd love it. That would be a nice link too.
Are you speaking about Mike and Marcus, or the speakers today?
Yes.
No, they're different teams.
For example, Michael, who's speaking a lot about, what should count and what shouldn't count. I have some of my own questions I'd like to ask him. And
you can reach us at carbonremoval@xprize.org. Those emails go to the full team, and then we can respond and redirect as needed.
Perfect. Okay, I can live with that. Thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have a question. When will the recordings be posted for the PAX summits?
Today. They will be posted today, and you'll be notified via email when they are available.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
And also,
Oh, thank you. You're one of the groups that made an email. Okay.
will there be other networking events following after each summit as well this week?
After each of the track sessions, so we have rock, land, and air left this week. It'll follow the same format that we did today. We'll have expert speakers, and then we'll have an hour of breakout networking. Yes.
Is there a blog that's on the POP site?
A who? I'm sorry?
A blog on the POP site.
A blog?
For the different categories.
There's not a blog. Are you looking to find out more information about the tracks, or?
Yeah, I haven't had too much luck with that. The search engine, where you put in, either the name of the team or what the team does and so forth and so on, is to finding teams that do exactly the same thing that I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I put in, carbon capture and alkalinization, I don't get. Actually, I finally did do that, and it worked better, and I got more stuff. But that I can't really, it's hard for that search engine to find the name of teams and that sort of thing that are doing the same thing that you do.
Maybe we could have a networking summit where we all get together and do just networking between the teams.
That is something that we're considering. This was something we really wanted to get this summit together before everyone breaks, and we'll be working on their milestone submissions and all that. So we are considering doing something like that hopefully soon in the next year. So
along the same lines, would it be possible to search names? Because we're meeting a lot of people, but it's hard to keep track of who's in what team.
Yeah.
Would it be possible to search names in the pop?
I will give that suggestion to our
Thank
team, because I think as of now you can really search by location and whether they're registered and that sort of thing, but not by track per se, or
the names of the individuals.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's a great suggestion, and we'll take it to our pop team.
Last thing popped up. I'm sorry to keep you guys stuck here.
That's okay.
As I'm filling the paperwork out for the.
You've cut out. Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
As I'm filling the paperwork out for the milestone submissions, when I save and continue and then come back to it, it has erased all of my paperwork. Just so you know, that might be a problem with the thing.
Okay. Can you please send that to carbonremoval@xprize.org, just to me make sure we're tracking that?
Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that could be a glitch that just needs to be fixed on our end, and then hopefully, we'll do a test and make sure that that's resolved. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
I appreciate it. No more questions.
Yeah, we've got to go. Unfortunately, we've got to let everyone get to the rest of their day, but thanks for joining, and look out for the emails and recordings today.
Roopa, sorry, is the participants max on the rooms for any of the meetings for later on this week?
We're trying to resolve that. I think that's just an add-on that we need to install in our account. But that's our top priority, because we have quite a few people that are registered.
Just so we don't all rush to the next one, and
we're definitely
other
getting
people
to it. So
all good.
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.